Mrs. Cole nodded impressively and took another generous gulp of gin. Did she say anything before she died? Asked Dumbledore. Anything about the boy's father, for instance? Now, as it happens, she did, said Mrs. Cole, who seemed to be rather enjoying herself now with the gin in her hand and an eager audience. I remember she said to me, I hope he looks like his papa, and I won't lie, she was right to hope it, because she was no beauty. And then she told me he was to be named Tom for his father and Marvola for her father. Yes, I know. Funny name, isn't it? We wondered whether she came from a circus. And she said the boy's surname was to be Riddle. And she died soon after that, without another word. Well, we named him just as she said. It seemed so important to the poor girl, but no Tom, nor Marvolo, nor any kind of Riddle ever came looking for him, nor any family at all. So he stayed here in the orphanage, and he's been here ever since. Mrs. Cole helped herself almost absent-mindedly to another healthy measure of gin. 2 pink spots had appeared high on her cheekbones. Then she said, he's a funny boy. Yes, said Dumbledore. I thought he might be. He was a funny baby, too. He hardly ever cried, you know. And then, when he got a little older, he was odd. Odd in what way? Asked Dumbledore gently. Well, But Mrs. Cole pulled up short, and there was nothing blurry or vague about the inquisitorial glance she shot Dumbledore over her gin glass. He's definitely got a place at your school, you say? Definitely, said Dumbledore. And nothing I say can change that. Nothing, said Dumbledore. You'll be taking him away, whatever. Whatever, repeated Dumbledore. She squinted at him as though deciding whether or not to trust him. Apparently she decided she could, because she said in a sudden rush, he scares the other children. You mean he is a bully? Asked Dumbledore. I think he must be, said Mrs. Cole, frowning slightly, but it's very hard to catch him at it. There have been incidents, nasty things. Billy stubs his rabbit. Well, Tom said he didn't do it, and I don't see how he could have done, but even so, it didn't hang itself from the rafters, did it? I shouldn't think so, no, said Dumbledore quietly. But I'm jiggered if I know how he got up there to do it. All I do know is he and Billy had argued the day before. And then Mrs. Cole took another swig of gin, slopping a little over her chin this time. On the summer outing, we take them out, you know, once a year to the countryside or to the seaside. Well, Amy Benson and Dennis Bishop were never quite right afterwards, and all we ever got out of them was that they'd gone into a cave with Tom Riddle. He swore they'd just gone exploring, but something happened in that cave, I'm sure of it. And, well, there have been a lot of things, funny things. Though her cheeks were flushed, her gaze was steady. I don't think many people will be sorry to see the back of him. You understand, I'm sure, that we will not be keeping him permanently, said Dumbledore. He will have to return here at the very least every summer. Ah, well, that's better than a whack on the nose with a rusty poker, said Mrs. Cole with a slight hiccup. She got to her feet, and Harry was impressed to see that she was quite steady, even though 2/3 of the gin was now gone. I suppose you'd like to see him. Very much, said Dumbledore, rising too. She led him out of their office and up the stone stairs, calling out instructions and admonitions to helpers and children as she passed. The orphans, Harry saw, were all wearing the same kind of greyish tunic. They looked reasonably well cared for, but there was no denying that this was a grim place in which to grow up. Here we are, said Mrs. Cole as they turned off the second landing and stopped outside the first door. She knocked and entered. Tom, you've got a visitor. This is Mr. Dumbarton, sorry Dunderbore. He's come to tell you, well, I'll let him do it. Mrs. Cole closed the door behind her. It was a small, bare room with nothing in it except an old wardrobe, a wooden chair, and an iron bedstead. A boy was sitting on top of the grey blankets, his legs stretched out in front of him. There was no trace of the gaunts in Tom Riddle's face. Merope had got her dying wish. He was his handsome father in miniature, tall for 11 years old, dark-haired and pale. His eyes narrowed slightly as he took in Dumbledore's appearance. There was a moment's silence. How do you do, Tom? Said Dumbledore, walking forward and holding out his hand. The boy hesitated, then shook it. Dumbledore drew up the hard wooden chair beside Riddle so that the pair of them looked rather like a hospital patient and visitor. I am Professor Dumbledore. Professor, repeated Riddle. He looked wary. Is that like doctor? What are you here for? Did she get you in to have a look at me? He was pointing at the door through which Mrs. Cole had just left. No, no, said Dumbledore, smiling. I don't believe you, said Riddle. She wants me looked at, doesn't she? Tell the truth. He spoke the last 3 words with a ringing force that was almost shocking. It was a command, and it sounded as though he had given it many times before. His eyes had widened, and he was glaring at Dumbledore, who made no response except to continue smiling pleasantly. After a few seconds, Riddle stopped glaring, though he looked, if anything, warier still. Who are you? I have told you. My name is Professor Dumbledore, and I work at a school called Hogwarts. I have come to offer you a place at my school, your new school if you would like to come. Riddle's reaction to this was most surprising. He leapt from the bed and backed away from Dumbledore, looking furious. You can't kid me. The asylum, that's where you're from, isn't it? Professor, yes, of course. Well, I'm not going, see? That old cat's the one who should be in the asylum. I never did anything to little Amy Benson or Dennis Bishop, and you can ask them, they'll tell you. I am not from the asylum, said Dumbledore patiently. I am a teacher. And if you will sit down calmly, I shall tell you about Hogwarts. Of course, if you would rather not come to the school, nobody will force you. I'd like to see them try, sneered Riddle. Hogwarts, Dumbledore went on, is a school for people with special abilities. I'm not mad. I know that you are not mad. Hogwarts is not a school for mad people. Hogwarts is a school of magic. There was silence. Riddle had frozen, his face expressionless, but his eyes were flickering back and forth between each of Dumbledore's, as though trying to catch one of them lying. Magic, he repeated in a whisper. That's right, said Dumbledore. It's magic, what I can do. What is it that you can do? All sorts, breathed Riddle. A flush of excitement was rising up his neck into his hollow cheeks. He looked fevered. I can make things move without touching them. I can make animals do what I want them to do without training them. I can make bad things happen to people who annoy me. I can make them hurt if I want to. His legs were trembling. He stumbled to the bed and sat down again, staring at his hands, his head bowed as though in prayer. I knew I was different, he whispered to his own quivering fingers. I knew I was special. Always, I knew there was something. Well, you were quite right, said Dumbledore, who was no longer smiling, but watching Riddle intently. You are a wizard. Riddle lifted his head. His face was transfigured. There was a wild happiness upon it, yet for some reason it did not make him better looking. On the contrary, his finely carved features seemed somehow rougher, almost bestial. Are you a wizard too? Yes, I am. Prove it, said Riddle at once, in the same commanding tone he had used when he had said, tell the truth. Dumbledore raised his eyebrows. If, as I take it, you are accepting your place at Hogwarts, of course I am, then you will address me as Professor or Sir. Riddle's expression hardened for the most fleeting moment before he said, in an unrecognisably polite voice, I'm sorry, sir, I meant, please, Professor, could you show me? Harry was sure that Dumbledore was going to refuse, that he would tell Riddle there would be plenty of time for practical demonstrations at Hogwarts, that they were currently in a building full of muggles and must therefore be cautious. To his great surprise, however, Dumbledore drew his wand from an inside pocket, pointed it at the shabby wardrobe in the corner, and gave the wand a casual flick. The wardrobe burst into flames. Riddle jumped to his feet. Harry could hardly blame him for howling in shock and rage. All his worldly possessions must be in there. But even as Riddle rounded on Dumbledore, the flames vanished, leaving the wardrobe completely undamaged. Riddle stared from the wardrobe to Dumbledore. Then, looking greedy, he pointed at the wand. Where can I get one of them? All in good time, said Dumbledore. I think there is something trying to get out of your wardrobe. And sure enough, a faint rattling could be heard from inside it. For the first time, Riddle looked frightened. Open the door, said Dumbledore. Riddle hesitated, then crossed the room and threw open the wardrobe door. On the topmost shelf, above a rail of threadbare clothes, a small cardboard box was shaking and rattling as though there were several frantic mice trapped inside it. Take it out, said Dumbledore. Riddle took down the quaking box. He looked unnerved. Is there anything in that box that you ought not to have? Asked Dumbledore. Riddle threw Dumbledore a long, clear, calculating look. Yes, I suppose so, sir. Open it, said Dumbledore. Riddle took off the lid and tipped the contents onto his bed without looking at them. Harry, who had expected something much more exciting, saw a mess of small everyday objects, a yo-yo, a silver thimble, and a tarnished mouth organ among them. Once free of the box, they stopped quivering and lay quite still upon the thin blankets. "You will return them to their owners with your apologies," said Dumbledore, putting his wand back into his jacket. "I shall know whether it has been done. You have, inadvertently, I am sure, been using your powers in a way that is neither taught nor tolerated at our school. You are not the first, nor will you be the last to allow your magic to run away with you. But you should know that Hogwarts can expel students, and the Ministry of Magic, yes, there is a ministry, will punish lawbreakers still more severely. All new wizards must accept that, in entering our world, they abide by our rules." But as you probably know, he didn't.